So let's talk a little bit about what we found studying Portland area gardens. We originally chose 24 gardens to sample. This is just I-5 right here, 205, and a dot of all of the gardens where we sampled. It takes us 4 days to sample these 24 gardens. So you might notice that this is what's known as roadside ecology. I tried to choose gardens that had a quasi-efficient driving route. Isabella Messer, my undergraduate student who works in my lab, I feel so bad for because she literally is stuck in a car with her professor for 6 hours every day, 4 days in a row. What we do when we visit a garden is we drop off traps one day and then we come back a day later, 24 hours later, to pick them up. What do our traps look like? Well, you are going to be so unimpressed, but let me tell you at least the rationale behind our unimpressive trapping method. Bees find nectar and pollen using sight and smell. So they see best in the UV color range, and they tend to see best flowers that are yellow, white, and blue. So here we actually have some UV nectar guides on this cranesgill. You can see nectar guides on this pansy. What these nectar guides actually are is they're kind of like an airplane person saying, this is where you go if you want to find the nectar, if you want to find the pollen. Here's a wood anemone as we see it, bright yellow. This is what a bee sees. So notice the target right here. This is the same flower under UV light. This is a target basically telling the bee this is where you need to go if you want to find nectar and pollen. So now I'm going to show you our unimpressive traps, which are nothing more than dollar store bowls that are white, blue, and yellow. We painted some of the white bowls with fluorescent blue paint and some of the white bowls with fluorescent yellow paint. We fill them with water. Flying insects are attracted to the color. The water has a little bit of soap in it so that when they land on the surface of the water, they break the surface tension and fall through. So we basically drown the insects in these bowls and then take them back to the lab so that we can curate them. And I'll talk about the need to kill them to identify them in just a moment. And then I also use this little insect sucker. It's called a pooter. Here is rubber tubing, and it's connected to a metal tube. And here's another metal tube, and I'm holding a ball in my hand. I suck the bees up as they actually visit a flower. Now, most entomologists would use a net, and most of my entomological friends think that I'm an idiot for using this method, but we're working in people's home gardens, and if you're netting insects off of a flower, you're knocking off the blooms, and that would make us very unwelcome guests in the 24 gardens that we've been invited to basically visit people's backyards for 3 consecutive summers. So we're trying to be good guests by literally sucking them off of the flowers as they're visiting. When a bee visits a flower and starts to suck nectar out of that flower, there is a moment where they are tied into that nectary and they can't fly away very quickly. So I've been doing this for more than 10 years. I've become very good at it over that time. It's not the most efficient collecting way, but it's a good way for us to collect without being bad visitors in the gardens that we visit. Then we take them back to the lab, just a photo of what our lab looks like, also not super impressive. Then we pin and label each and every insect. It's very meticulous work. We note if we collected them by pan trapping, those water pan traps, or by aspirating them. I have blue boxes covering up the identity of the gardens where we collected them because I did promise people a level of anonymity if they were going to participate in our study. This bee right here is numbered number 933. Each bee gets an individual identification number so that we can track all of the information associated with that bee, where it was collected, how it was collected, when it was collected, and eventually its identity. Just this one I think is kind of funny. Whether you have ever thought of it, bumblebees collected in water pan traps, you actually have to shampoo them and blow dry them to make their hairs come out fluffy again, so that they're identified. And because I don't identify the bees myself, I send them to a museum specialist, and museum specialists are particular people. And if your bees don't look good, then they send them back to you. So we actually have to blow dry the bees. I've dedicated, I don't put much work in my appearance anyway. So I gave my hairdryer to the lab, but then my husband and I were actually going to go out for a date, and I was like, oh, I'm going to actually try to look nice for him for once. And then I remembered, oh, I don't have my blow dryer because we're doing bumblebees. Just a shout out to Sarah Kornbluth at the American Museum of Natural History, who is identifying our garden bees for us. On the handout, I have a Flickr site, flickr.com, OSUMG, where I have pictures. We also take pictures at multiple angles of every bee, and I put the identity of the bees there once I get them back from the museum specialist. So if you're interested in kind of taking a view of what we found, you can visit that website. Just some quick initial impressions from the first year's data in particular. Ligated sweat bees, honeybees, and yellow-faced bumblebees were in every garden. I have every in brackets because there's a possibility I might have missed one garden, but they are very broadly distributed along Portland area gardens. I think that gardeners who are using overhead irrigation have depressed bee abundance and diversity compared to those that are using no irrigation or drip. I still need to tease that out a bit more because it might be correlated with lawn area, and lawn as a general rule is not great bee resource. But my initial impression is that gardeners who are using overhead irrigation have reduced abundance and diversity compared to drip or no irrigation. I have a couple of gardens that are next to golf courses, and I'm noticing depressed bee diversity and abundance in those gardens, with one exception. There's one garden that even though it's right next to a golf course, they still have a lot of bees, but this garden is one where literally every space that is not a path is planted with flowering plants. So it'll be interesting to kind of tease apart the influence of golf course versus flowers in that one. Sunnier gardens have more bees. Those that are shaded tend to have reduced bee abundance and diversity, but I suspect that they might have more special bees, more unique bees. I need to wait until I get the identities back from the American Museum before I know that for sure. And in general, what you plant does matter. And when I talk about what you plant matters, I always like to go to, I think it's this garden right here, one of these two gardens right here in North Portland. Site 51, here is site 51 with a big circle over it so you can't tell exactly where this person lives. Here is I-5, here is Killingsworth, here's a Mac Station line. So it's one of my most urban gardens. It's also one of the smallest, only 0.1 acre total, but they have the second highest bee abundance of all of the 24 gardens that we've sampled. And that is because this particular gardener is focused, like so passionate about bee gardening, that every plant that makes it into their garden only makes it into their garden if someone somewhere has said that it is a bee-friendly plant. So he has a lot of salvias, has a lot of borage, big leaf maple. He plants for butterflies as well. California poppy, cinquefoil, nodding onion, Doug aster. I actually have the full plant list from this garden on your handout. So I think it's on the second page of the handout. Plant list for Site 51 if you're interested in knowing what they have in their own garden. So initial identifications of bees from the 24 gardens we sampled show that we have about 20 species of bee in Portland area gardens. However, this list was derived by me, and I am an ecologist, and I'm not a systematist can't even say it. I'm not a systematist or a taxonomist, so my level of BID expertise is substantially smaller than the museum experts. But just as a first glance at the bees, we have about 20 species that have been collected from Portland area gardens, and that doesn't count the leaf-cutting bees or the small carpenter bees, where the majority of bee biodiversity tends to lie. Those are very biodiverse groups. So I'm really interested in seeing how many we have in Portland area gardens. The most bees that have been collected from an area where gardens only have been sampled is 114. I don't think we're going to hit 114 bees, but I suspect we're going to lie out at somewhere around 50, 60 species of bee in Portland area gardens. Just some notes about some of the ones that we found. Lots of bombus, lots of bumblebees. In Portland area gardens, Bombus vase, Bombus melanopygus flies early in the season, Bombus apostasis, mixtus, and Griciacolis have all been collected from gardens. Bumblebees, as a general rule, are generalist, which means that they will take pollen and nectar from a broad variety of flowering plants. They're not specialized on a certain group. And they are hive nesters that usually nest in the ground. Now note the number of ground nesting bees I'm going to go through, because I am going to come back and talk about the importance of ground habitat for bee biodiversity. In our separate study of bees with native plants that my graduate student is doing, I had a separate taxonomist take a look at those bees, and something that was really interesting to me is that we have two species, Bombus fervidus and Bombus calignosus, that are on the IUCN list of endangered species as vulnerable bees. So these are bees which are not endangered, but they are considered vulnerable to range extraction and extinction, and we're finding them on garden plants in our native plant study. Just one note that this is Bombus vase, the most broadly distributed bumblebee in the Willamette Valley. You see Bombus vase everywhere. And the way that you identify Bombus vase is yellow face, thin yellow stripe near the tip of the abdomen, thin yellow stripe, yellow face, thin yellow stripe. Its common name is the yellow-faced bumblebee. But here is this threatened species, this vulnerable species, Bombus calignosus, the obscure bumblebee. Notice yellow face, thin yellow stripe, yellow face, thin yellow stripe. The only way that taxonomists can tell them apart is they actually have to dissect the males and pull out their genitalia and compare their genitalia. So that's part of the reason that we have to actually take them back to the lab, because for some of these cryptic species, you can't tell them apart unless you actually do an internal dissection. One of my favorite bumblebees, Bombus mixtus, the fuzzy horn bumblebee. These are pretty common in Portland area gardens as well. They look like little flying teddy bears. I absolutely adore them. Another common bee, wool carder bees. This is a non-native bee to this area. They also are generalist. They nest in cavities. So if you prune your roses, or if you have caneberries and you prune your caneberries every year, or even if you have like sedums and you prune your sedums, they like to nest in those little cavities of those sticks and twigs. They love lamb's ear. They're called the wool carder bee because they use these fuzzy hind legs to comb the fuzz off of lamb's ear, and that's what they line their nest with. Longhorn bees, here's a female longhorn bee, here's a male longhorn bee. Notice that the male's antennae are substantially longer than the females. Whenever I see the female longhorn bee covered in pollen, I like to say that she's like wearing MC Hammer pants. So every time I see this photo, I just want to start singing Too Legit to Quit, but I will not do it here. Just a close-up of this beautiful face of this male longhorn bee with this gold clypeus, which is what that little part is known as. Just absolutely gorgeous. These are native bees to our area. In our native plant study, we found the most associated with Nepeta, which is catmint, goldenrod, Doug-aster, Mattia, and Sildacia, which is a checker mallow. They're also soil nesters. So I'm just going to trying to tell you that a lot of these native bees nest in the soil before going back and talking about the importance of soil habitat. Here are some sweat bees in the genus Agopastomum. They are iridescent green. They're one of my favorite bees, so beautiful. They are also ground nesters. They have a nest in the soil which kind of looks like a little ant nest. So they have like a little tunnel and then an opening right there. In our native plant study, we found them on Mattia once again, Doug Aster, California poppy, and Clarkia. Just a cross section of what these nests look like when you go underground. This is about a foot underground. These are solitary bees, but they nest communally. So here we have multiple females sharing a nest. And each one of these areas, that's where they're going to have their bee bred, raising one individual bee. Here are two females sharing a nest, and here's just a single female, just to show you what it looks like. Ceratina are the small carpenter bees. These are native, they're very small, hence the name small carpenter bees. They nest in cavities as well. So you're going to find them in your caneberry openings and your rose cane openings after you prune them. They have an interesting form of sociality where they tend to be social, but they actually, the females cooperate to defend each other's young. In our native plant study, we found them on pearly everlasting, rose checker mallow, Oregon sunshine, and gilia, collecting pollen and nectar. Okay, so this is just showing you what their nest looks like. And here is a spider. When a spider finds a nest of small carpenter bees, they basically go through and just plow through them, just eating the young. So the females will actually take turns defending that nest of multiple young bees against spiders and other predators. Halictus legatus, this is the most broadly distributed native bee that we found in our study, as well as in other studies. They'll take pollen and nectar from just about everything. They also nest in the soil. I'll skip through that. And then the leaf-cutting bees, which instead of having a pollen basket on their hind leg, they carry a pollen basket on their belly. So they have lots of hairs on the bottom of their belly. If you ever see a bee with this really hairy underside, that's almost assuredly a leaf-cutting bee. This is where taxonomists suspect the bulk of Oregon bee biodiversity is. So we're really excited that we've collected so many leaf-cutting bees from Portland area gardens. Have not had a chance to identify them just yet. Cavity nesting bees rather than soil nesting bees.